Two men. Same chapter of Scripture. Same temptation pressing down on both of them. One walked through it clean. The other collapsed and spent years rebuilding what one moment had cost him. The difference was not willpower. It was not circumstance. It was something one of them had been quietly doing for years that the other had completely neglected. This is the Bible's most underestimated instruction for temptation, and almost nobody talks about it. His name was Marcus. He grew up in a church-going household, knew the verses, attended the services, genuinely believed what he said he believed. By his mid-30s, he had a marriage he valued, a faith he would have called solid, and a reputation in his community that mattered to him. He was not a hypocrite. He was sincere. He simply had never been taught to treat his spirit the way an athlete treats a body before a race. His spiritual life was reactive. He prayed when something was wrong. He read when he felt dry. He showed up to community when it was convenient. His faith was real, but his training was non-existent. His name was Daniel. Same kind of background, same earnest belief, same pressures of a working life and a complicated world. He had read the same books, sat under the same kind of preaching, but somewhere in his early 30s, a single passage had lodged itself in him and refused to let go. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8. Bodily training is of some value, but godliness is of value in every way. And the line that preceded it, train yourself to be godly. Not try harder, not wish harder, train. He had taken that verb seriously in a way most people in his circles simply had not. The pressure arrived for Marcus without warning, as it usually does. A relationship at work that had drifted closer than it should. A season of distance in his marriage. A version of himself that had been quietly accumulating grievances for months. Unchecked, unexamined, unnamed. When the moment came, he was empty. Not evil. Empty. He had nothing to draw on because he had deposited nothing. The temptation did not feel like a choice. It felt like a current he was already inside. The pressure arrived for Daniel differently in its specifics, identically in its structure. Financial stress that had been building for over a year. A shortcut that was technically available to him, one that would have crossed a line he had always told himself he would never cross. The offer was quiet, private, and reasonable sounding. But when it landed, something in him had already met it before it arrived. Not because he was stronger than Marcus, because he had rehearsed this territory. Not the specific scenario, but the interior posture. His spirit had been to that kind of ground before, in small repetitions, day after day. Marcus rebuilt slowly. It took a long time before he could sit with what had happened and name it clearly. What he eventually said, to the counselor he finally started seeing, and to his wife who had chosen to stay, was that he had treated his faith like a credential rather than a practice. He had believed the right things, earnestly, but belief unexercised is not the same as belief trained. He had known what was right. He had not developed the reflex to choose it under pressure. Daniel did not emerge untouched. He told a close friend later that the hardest part was not the moment of decision, but the months that followed. When the financial pressure did not resolve and the shortcut was still technically there, he went back to the same training he had always returned to. Not dramatic, not loud. The daily rhythm of placing himself in proximity to what was true, even when nothing felt particularly spiritual about it. Especially then. The training was not for the seasons when it felt meaningful. It was for the seasons when it did not. The two men never met. They live in different cities, in overlapping but separate communities, and neither knows the other exists. But the convergence is not in their acquaintance. It is in the mechanism. Paul does not write to Timothy and say, "Try to be godly," or "want godliness badly enough." He uses the Greek word gumnaze. It is the same root as gymnasium. The command is physical in its vocabulary on purpose. You do not walk into a test of strength having never lifted anything. You do not navigate a moment of spiritual pressure by summoning resources you have never built. The variable that separated them was not character. It was not natural moral strength. It was accumulated reps. Small, consistent, often unremarkable deposits into a part of themselves that would either have something to offer in the critical moment or would not. Marcus is in a different place now. He still carries what happened, but he carries it differently. He trains now. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but deliberately. He does not wait to feel spiritually motivated before he practices. He practices so that the capacity is there when motivation is beside the point. Daniel still does the same thing he has always done. Nothing about his routine looks heroic. That is exactly what he would say is the point. The Bible does not tell you to try harder. It tells you to train. Those are not the same instruction, and the distance between them is everything. If that distinction landed for you, leave it in the comments. What does spiritual training actually look like in your own life? That conversation is worth having, and it starts below.